I stood in the entryway wearing my full military dress uniform, pulling on my gloves while my husband smiled at me like he always did. He kissed my cheek, told me to stay safe on my weekend reserve duty, and watched me walk out the front door. He heard the heavy clatter of my boots on the porch. He heard my car door slam. He even heard the engine ignite and pull down the driveway. What he didn't know was that I threw the car in park 2 houses down, snuck back through the tree line and slipped into the utility closet off the kitchen. I reached into my pocket, flipped on the handheld screen of our baby monitor, and waited. Seconds later, my husband made a phone call, and what came out of his mouth made my blood run stone cold. Before we begin, subscribe and leave a comment with the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story reaches. My name is Captain Sarah Hayes. At 32 years old, I've spent a decade balancing my civilian life with my duty as an Army Reserve officer and former active duty logistics specialist. I've led soldiers through high-stress operations, managed multi-million-dollar supply lines, and learned early on that in any tactical environment, your instincts are often your first line of defense. For 5 years, I was married to Mark. Mark was a high-earning financial strategist who always looked at my military service with a quiet, patronizing condescension. To him, my rank and my drills were just a quaint side hobby, something to occupy my time while he handled what he called real business. I let it slide for years, choosing peace over friction. But over the past few months, the atmosphere in our home shifted. Small, subtle red flags began to multiply. Mark started changing his phone passcodes without warning. Whispered, hurried phone calls would suddenly end the moment I walked into the room. Then came the persistent, almost desperate push for me to take an upcoming out-of-state reserve training assignment. He kept asking about my schedule, double-checking the exact dates I would be away, framing it as genuine concern for my career. In the military, when patterns change unexpectedly, you don't ignore it. You investigate. My tactical training kicked in. My gut was telling me that a domestic ambush was being prepared, and I was done playing blind. I decided it was time to run a test and see what my husband was really planning behind my back. The execution began on a crisp Saturday morning. I stood in front of the hallway mirror, carefully putting on my full military dress uniform. Mark watched me from the kitchen doorway, sipping his coffee with that practiced, effortless calm he always wore. I adjusted my jacket, pulled on my leather gloves, and grabbed my travel bag. He stepped forward, kissed my cheek, and told me to stay safe on my weekend reserve duty. I looked into his eyes, smiled, and promised I'd see him on Sunday evening. I walked out the front door, making sure my combat boots clattered loudly against the wooden porch steps. I tossed my bag into the trunk of my SUV, slammed the driver's side door with deliberate force, and started the engine. I backed out of the driveway, pulled down the street, and turned the corner, completely out of sight from our house. 2 doors down, I threw the car into park behind a thick row of hedges. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my mind was laser-focused. I grabbed my small tactical backpack, killed the engine, and slipped out of the vehicle. Staying low, I moved through the neighbor's tree line, using the overgrown shrubbery along the property border for cover. I reached our backyard completely undetected, unlocked the side utility door to the house, and stepped inside. I squeezed into the narrow pantry closet off the kitchen, a sound-insulated utility space filled with floor-to-ceiling shelving. I pulled the handheld monitor receiver from my pocket and switched it on. Months ago, we'd set up a high-definition baby monitor unit in our 4-year-old daughter's playroom, right next to Mark's home office. The small screen glowed to life in the dark pantry. I pressed the audio button, held my breath, and waited in the absolute silence of the house. Not even 30 seconds later, the speaker crackled to life. I heard the distinct sound of Mark's phone dialing, followed by his confident, relaxed voice filling the tiny closet. Mark didn't just make a call, he put it on speakerphone, and the room's acoustics amplified every single word directly into my earpiece. "Is it done?" Mark asked, his tone crisp and entirely devoid of the warmth he'd shown me minutes earlier. A sharp, familiar voice answered back. It was my mother-in-law, Evelyn. She just drove away, Mark. I saw her car turn the corner from my window. We're clear. Good, Mark said, taking a slow sip of what sounded like his glass. The attorney has the rest of the paperwork ready. Once she's locked into her out-of-state rotation next month, we file the transfer protocols. By the time she lands, the home deed and the family trust will be fully restructured under the corporate LLC. I stood frozen in the dark pantry, the cold air hitting my face as if someone had opened a window in winter. The trust fund wasn't Mark's. It was an inheritance left to me by my late grandfather, meant to secure my daughter's future and backstop our family. But over the last 2 years, Mark had slowly maneuvered himself into a co-trustee position under the guise of optimizing tax yields. Then came a third voice on the phone, a woman's voice I didn't recognize, smooth and calculating. What about her signature on the power of attorney forms? If she double-checks the bank records when she gets back, she'll notice the signature discrepancies immediately. Mark laughed, a low, dismissive chuckle that burned right through me. Sarah's a soldier playing house. She trusts me implicitly, and frankly, she doesn't have the financial sense to trace an offshore holding structure. She thinks reserve duty is high stakes. By the time she realizes what happened to the deeds, it'll all be legally tied up in my LLC, and she won't have the liquid capital left to fight me in court. Every muscle in my body went rigid. The betrayal wasn't just financial. It was a deliberate, cold-blooded ambush planned by the man who shared my bed. But as my hand tightened around the monitor, my military training kicked in. Anger would blow my cover. Strategy would win the war. I took a deep breath, stabilized my core, and kept recording. I pulled out my secure secondary phone, held it close to the monitor screen, and made sure the recording app captured every syllable in high fidelity. The digital timestamp was clear, the voice prints unmistakable. Then came the sound of the front door unlocking. She left her office key on the kitchen counter just like you asked, the third voice said from the hallway. I peeked through the slit in the pantry door and saw her, a crisp, smartly dressed corporate paralegal Mark had been keeping on his private payroll. Perfect, Mark said, walking into the study right next to my hiding spot. Her original property titles and grandfather's estate ledger are in the floor safe behind the bookshelf. We take the originals, swap in the modified schedules, and seal the envelope before Monday. They were so focused on their target that they completely lost situational awareness. They had no idea that the woman they were writing off as an unsuspecting victim was standing 6 feet away, recording their every footstep. While Mark dialed the combination to my safe, I took advantage of the rustling papers and sliding bookshelf. I unlocked the utility room door, slipped out onto the back porch, and moved back through the tree line as silently as I'd arrived. I reached my SUV, placed both phones on the passenger seat, and took a long, stabilizing breath. The tears wanted to come, but I suppressed them. Grief is a luxury you can't afford mid-operation. 10 minutes later, I pulled up to the offices of Vance and Mercer, a prominent downtown law firm. Sitting in the corner office was Major Tom Vance, a former military prosecutor turned civilian asset protection expert. I walked into his office in full dress uniform, placed the digital recorder on his desk, and said 4 simple words. We need to execute a counter-ambush. Major Vance listened to the recording twice, his expression hardening with every passing second. As a veteran prosecutor, he recognized financial fraud and military power of attorney abuse instantly. He looked up at me, set his pen down, and gave a sharp, approving nod. They think they're setting a trap for a soldier away on drill, Vance said. We're going to let them step right into it. For the next 3 days, I played my role to perfection. I called Mark every evening from my hotel room near the base, keeping my voice light, calm, and completely oblivious. He sounded warm, almost overly affectionate, reassuring me that everything at home was fine and urging me not to rush back. Every word out of his mouth was a calculated lie, but I gave him no reason to suspect I knew the truth. Behind the scenes, Vance's team worked around the clock. They froze my grandfather's trust, secured emergency injunctions against any deed transfers, and subpoenaed the audit trail for Mark's corporate LLC. On Tuesday morning, the trap was ready to spring. I had arranged a formal estate review meeting at Vance's downtown offices under the pretense of finalizing standard joint asset filings before my upcoming fall rotation. Mark and his mother, Evelyn, arrived early, walking into the high-rise conference room with the quiet confidence of people who believed they were about to execute their final victory. Mark was wearing his custom suit. Evelyn carried her designer handbag, smiling graciously at the staff. They brought their own personal attorney, expecting a routine signature session where I would hand over my authority. The door opened, and I walked in. I was wearing my dark blue military dress uniform, my posture rigid, my eye contact unwavering. Behind me walked Major Vance and a lead forensic accountant carrying 2 heavy binders. Mark smiled, standing up to grease the room. "Sarah, honey, you look so official. Let's get these papers signed so we can grab lunch." I didn't smile back. I pulled out a heavy oak chair, sat down at the end of the long mahogany table, and looked him dead in the eye. "Sit down, Mark," I said, my voice dropping an octave into pure command tone. "We aren't signing your papers today." Mark's attorney cleared his throat, opening his briefcase with practiced authority. "Captain Hayes, my client is simply attempting to streamline your family's asset structure. If you have concerns about the joint LLC schedule, we can certainly review—" "Save it," Major Vance interrupted, sliding a sleek silver digital recorder onto the center of the mahogany table. Vance pressed play. The conference room's surround sound speakers instantly filled with crystal-clear audio. Mark's own voice echoed off the glass walls. "She's a soldier playing house. She trusts me implicitly. By the time she realizes what happened to the deeds, it'll all be legally tied up in my LLC." Then came Evelyn's voice, followed by the paralegal discussing the modified property schedules and the floor safe in my study. The silence that followed was suffocating. The color drained from Mark's face so fast he looked genuinely ill. Beside him, Evelyn's hands began to tremble as she gripped her designer purse, her mouth opening and closing without making a sound. Their attorney looked at Mark, closed his briefcase, and slowly leaned back in his chair, completely disowning his clients on the spot. "That recording," Vance said calmly, tapping the binder in front of him, "was made legally on property owned solely by Captain Hayes's trust. Along with it, we have forensic documentation of unauthorized access to her private safe, attempted power of attorney forgery, and grand larceny conspiracy involving your corporate accounts." Mark looked at me, his smug arrogance completely shattered into pathetic desperation. "Sarah, please, It was just financial maneuvering. We were trying to protect our family's future." "You weren't protecting our family," I said, leaning across the table, my eyes locked on his. "You were mounting a domestic ambush against your wife while expecting her to be away on military service. But you forgot one crucial detail, Mark. I don't surrender to hostile forces." Vance laid out the settlement agreement. Mark had 2 choices: sign over full, unencumbered ownership of the house, relinquish all access to any joint accounts, and agree to an immediate, uncontested divorce, or face immediate criminal indictment for grand fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and illegal asset conversion. Shaking violently, Mark reached for the pen. Within 6 weeks, the divorce was finalized. Mark moved into a small rented apartment on the outskirts of the city, stripped of his corporate leverage and buried under the massive legal fees he owed his own defense team. Evelyn's social standing dissolved completely as word spread through our community about what they had tried to do. I retained full, sole ownership of our family home and secured my daughter's trust fund so tightly that no one could ever tamper with it again. Today, my daughter and I live in a home filled with peace, laughter, and complete security. Looking back, I realize that Mark's biggest mistake wasn't just greed. It was assuming that my quiet nature and dedication to service made me weak. He thought my uniform was just for show, but the tactical discipline, situational awareness, and strategic mindset I built in the military saved my life and my daughter's future from a silent domestic ambush. If you were in my shoes, standing in that pantry and listening to your spouse betray you over the baby monitor, what would you have done? Would you have confronted him right then, or stayed silent to execute a long-term plan? Comment your thoughts below, subscribe for more stories, and don't forget to mention the city you're watching from.